A couple was fast asleep when suddenly someone broke into their bedroom. The girl was trembling with fear, and Nacho instantly lost all drowsiness. In no time, Nacho was forcibly dragged away by a few burly men. Nacho was then taken to the place where his father, Manuel, was playing mahjong. Before Nacho could figure out what was happening, Victor, one of Gus's men, loaded his gun. It turned out that Victor was there to kill Manuel. Nacho wanted to stop him but was firmly held back by two strong men in the rear seat. Was he really going to see his father for the last time in such a manner? Overwhelmed, Nacho struggled desperately with all his might. Fortunately, Victor did not immediately fire upon entering. Then, Gus arrived and sat in the passenger seat. He adjusted the rearview mirror and used his gaze to threaten Nacho. Nacho got straight to the point and asked Gus what he wanted him to do. Gus did not mince words. He directly stated his demand. Nacho was to act as his informant and gather all the intelligence on Lalo's activities. Nacho argued that Lalo did not trust him, but Gus was indifferent to these excuses. He only cared about the results he wanted. Seeing his innocent father being dragged into this, Nacho pleaded for him, but one look from Gus, and Nacho understood everything.
I'll find a way, I'll make him trust me. Okay?
The car's hazard lights signaled to Victor that the deal was done. Manuel, engrossed in his game of mahjong, had no idea he had just brushed with death. Meanwhile, Jimmy, now a licensed lawyer, held a promotional event where he gave away all his remaining phones for free. When the thugs outside the tent heard about this, they flocked to get the phones. However, nothing is truly free. Jimmy had set his contact number to speed dial on each phone. Every time he handed out a phone, he reminded the recipient to press the speed dial button if they encountered any trouble. The free phones were quickly distributed by Jimmy. To retain the remaining clients, Jimmy decided to offer his legal services at a 50% discount for the next 2 weeks. It's undeniable that Jimmy is a marketing genius. Not only does he have a strong sense of service, but he also built his brand exceptionally well. Even the pen holders on the table, the bags for the phones, and the promotional banners inside the tent all prominently featured the name Saul Goodman. Considering his unique clientele, Jimmy did not wear a traditional suit. Instead, he opted for a very flashy outfit. This made him appear as a professional who stood out from the thugs while also sharing some common ground with them, allowing him to quickly bridge any gaps. Together with his brilliant tongue, Jimmy made the first move in his career as a criminal defense lawyer.
Well done, Magic Man. We're just getting started.
Jimmy then brought in his old partner to shoot a commercial. He appeared as Saul Goodman in a public area of the courthouse, using Bill's case to heavily promote himself. Even the questions from the fake reporters were pre-arranged by Jimmy. In this way, Jimmy managed to gather a few more clients.
My business to defend the citizens of Albuquerque against injustices of every kind.
Wow, you must be really expensive though.
Not at all. I believe every man, woman, and child deserves speedy justice at a price they can afford.
Do you have a card?
Not for me, for a friend.
Yes, and please tell your friend that I make no judgments and I'm available 24 hours a day.
Can I get one of those, sir?
Oh, yeah.
What about me?
Yeah, oh, sure. Okay. Wow.
Meanwhile, Kim wasn't idle either. She recently started offering free legal services to those in need out of the goodness of her heart. Today, she defended Bobby, who was charged with theft. Given Bobby's prior offenses, he was facing a standard sentence of 2 to 4 years in prison. However, Kim, using her expertise, managed to negotiate a deal for Bobby to serve only 5 months. To Kim's astonishment, despite all her efforts, Bobby refused to accept the deal she had secured for him. Bobby insisted on going to trial, hoping to gain the judge's sympathy by highlighting his pregnant wife and child. In a bid to avoid any prison time, Kim tried to persuade Bobby's wife to talk sense into him. Unexpectedly, they were both utterly clueless about the law, leaving Kim exasperated. Just then, Jimmy arrived to ask Kim out for lunch, but Kim said she couldn't go because she hadn't convinced Bobby and his wife to accept the deal she'd secured. As a lawyer, Jimmy had heard about the case. Seeing how stupid Bobby was, Jimmy decided to use some tactics on him. He asked Kim to put on a show with him. Jimmy pretends to be the DA. He and Kim discuss the case where Bobby and the others can hear them. Jimmy stated that he had found new evidence and was planning to withdraw the deal, intending to scare Bobby into accepting the agreement by implying he would spend the rest of his life in prison. However, Kim felt that this was deceitful and adamantly opposed Jimmy's approach. Jimmy countered that his intention was for Bobby's own good, and there was no malice in it. As Kim had previously said, their actions needed to be aimed at doing good. Nonetheless, Kim still felt it was inappropriate. Seeing no other choice, Jimmy left on his own, leaving Kim deeply conflicted. When Kim returned to Bobby, he asked her who the man was. After a moment's hesitation, Kim decided to follow Jimmy's suggestion.
I really couldn't say. We'll find out soon enough. Bobby, I'm sorry. It looks like they want to make an example out of you. All right, well, we better go tell the judge that we're taking this to trial.
Yeah, you know what?
Hearing Kim's words, Bobby immediately lost his composure. He begged Kim to plead with the district attorney on his behalf, saying he was willing to accept the 5-month sentence. It has to be said that Jimmy's understanding of human nature has become second nature to him. Under Jimmy's influence, this ability in Kim also started to be awakened. Although this approach quickly achieved her desired outcome, Kim's professional ethics as a lawyer constantly reminded her that she shouldn't do this. Kim went to a secluded place to repent for her actions. The next morning, Jimmy asked Kim about the case from the previous day. Kim said that the client had accepted the 5-month deal, but she didn't feel happy about it because she had used deceit, something she was reluctant to do. Just as Kim was about to leave for work, Jimmy invited her to go to the cinema with him for the evening. However, Kim didn't give a direct answer, saying she would probably have to work overtime. Noticing that Kim seemed unhappy, Jimmy had a pretty good idea of the reason, so before Kim drove off, Jimmy caught up with her. He couldn't let her spend the whole day feeling down. Jimmy insisted on taking Kim to see a villa to imagine their future together, because Kim's career was flourishing and Jimmy, who had just resumed work, had already signed over 40 clients' cases. Their future income looked promising. Jimmy believed that buying a house was only a matter of time. Taking the opportunity of viewing the house, Jimmy confessed to Kim about his half-price promotion. Previously, Jimmy had mentioned this plan to Kim, but Kim didn't approve of Jimmy's plan. She worried that it might encourage criminals to think that the cost of crime was low and deliberately commit crimes, and she was also concerned about Jimmy's image. Jimmy excused himself by saying he had accidentally let it slip. He told Kim not to worry and assured her that people wouldn't deliberately commit crimes because of it. Jimmy thought Kim might be angry because of this. Kim then spoke her mind, saying she didn't want to solve clients' problems through deceit. It wasn't just about the client from yesterday. She didn't want to use this method for any future cases either. To make Kim happy, Jimmy promised her anything. After speaking her mind, Kim finally smiled. As long as Kim was happy, Jimmy was relieved. Seeing the house was a pretense. Making his girlfriend happy was the real goal. Even the salesperson could tell they weren't serious about buying a house and didn't bother to greet them when they left. So, the question is such a thoughtful boyfriend your type? Is such a rational and honest girlfriend what you want? Criminal defense attorney Saul started offering a 50% discount promotion to quickly attract clients. Upon hearing this, two small-time thugs felt that their cost of committing crimes had significantly decreased, so they immediately went out to commit indiscriminate crimes. This precisely confirmed Kim's suspicions. However, what Jimmy didn't know was that his actions would trigger a butterfly effect, eventually dragging him into the whirlpool. Two thugs first went to buy some contraband, and when they ran out of money, they committed a robbery. They used the stolen money to buy more contraband. After indulging in extreme pleasure, they took advantage of their excitement to cause disturbances in the community. This time, they got more money and planned to buy 10 packs of contraband in one go. The lookout gave the signal, and Mouse upstairs counted the packets and dropped them down the drain pipe. Unexpectedly, there were too many packets this time, and they got stuck in the pipe. The thugs, not receiving their goods, started banging on the pipe. An argument broke out between the two parties. Meanwhile, Domingo, the small-time boss in charge of the area, was playing cards with his boss, Lalo. Nacho, trying to gain Lalo's trust, attempted to get closer to Lalo, but Lalo warned him not to talk business while he was playing cards. Flush with cash, Lalo bet $200, scaring the timid Domingo into retreating. It turned out Lalo had two low cards, while Domingo had a pair of 8s. Lalo mocked Domingo, calling him Crazy 8, and this was how Domingo got his nickname. Crazy 8 then received a call from his territory saying that two guys were causing trouble, so he had to go and resolve the issue himself. With no better option, Crazy 8 climbed up the pipe to fix it himself, trying to retrieve the contraband that got stuck, but he couldn't get it out after a long time. At that moment, The flashy modified car of a roadside thug attracted the police. The thugs under the ladder saw the police and scattered in fear, leaving Crazy 8 to be arrested by the police. The police called for reinforcements and surrounded the house. Lalo and Nacho, hearing the news, rushed to the scene. In their rush to escape, Mouse left the entire batch of contraband in the house. The contraband was on the verge of being seized. Nacho saw an opportunity to prove himself. If he could retrieve the contraband, Lalo would definitely see him in a new light. So, he decisively got out of the car and went to take back the contraband. This indeed surprised Lalo, who thought Nacho was just going to get himself killed. Nacho quickly climbed onto the roof, determined to earn Lalo's trust. Nacho was really going all out. Fortunately, at the last moment, Nacho managed to escape. Just when Lalo thought Nacho had been caught, Nacho returned with the contraband. Nacho's desperate actions weren't in vain. The next day, when he reported to Lalo, Lalo allowed him to make his own decisions, a sign of Lalo's trust in him. Lalo then asked Nacho about Crazy 8's background, worried that Crazy 8 might betray him after being arrested. Nacho explained that his family and Crazy 8's family had been friends for generations, and they knew each other very well. Nacho vouched for Crazy 8, assuring Lalo that he would keep his mouth shut. Nacho assumed Lalo wanted him to handle the situation, but Lalo revealed he had a better idea. Meanwhile, Jimmy, who now had over 40 clients, was waiting for District Attorney Suzanne to appear in court. He wanted to negotiate privately to quickly resolve his cases and receive his legal fees promptly. While waiting for Suzanne, Jimmy efficiently progressed several other cases.
Hey, my featherweight was simply defending himself against your raging bull.
No sale. Leader's doing the full freight. Welcome back to the law, McGill.
It's Goodman, and you'll be back. Veronica.
Slightly clear.
Hey, you got something for me? Muchas gracias. All right, let's see. Long sleeves covering the tats, that's excellent. And pull your hair back and lose the hardware. For honor doth protest a chin pillar.
Jimmy's efficiency was unparalleled. After a round of busy work, Suzanne still hadn't appeared in court. Jimmy continued practicing his conversation for when he would meet Suzanne. At that moment, Howard passed by and saw that Jimmy was back on his feet. He mentioned that his firm's business was also doing well and wanted to invite Jimmy to join HHM. Before Howard could finish, Suzanne walked out of the courtroom. Jimmy didn't bother talking to Howard. He directly chased after Suzanne and stated his purpose. Since Suzanne was responsible for more than a dozen of Jimmy's cases, he thought they were both busy and wanted to find some time to quickly resolve a few minor cases. But Suzanne remembered that Jimmy had scheduled the appointment for next Tuesday. She told Jimmy to wait until then. Jimmy made the excuse that his clients wanted quick results, but Suzanne wasn't buying it. She publicly exposed Jimmy's insincerity.
You're looking for turnover. You want to churn through more clients, make more money. That's your problem, not mine.
Jimmy was left speechless by Suzanne's blunt response. However, Jimmy is not one to give up easily without achieving his goal. Seizing the moment when Suzanne was alone in the elevator, Jimmy pretended to be on a call and hurried into the elevator with her. But before the elevator could start moving, it broke down. Jimmy acted very panicked, desperately calling for help. But to no avail. The sensible Suzanne called the emergency repair hotline and was told that a repair crew would be sent immediately. What Suzanne didn't know was that this was all part of Jimmy's plan. While they waited in the elevator, Jimmy didn't remain idle. He mumbled the draft of his upcoming court defense aloud. Suzanne, annoyed by the noise, asked him to read silently. Jimmy pretended to comply but continued to mumble. His goal was to get Suzanne to handle the cases they shared responsibility for during this time. Suzanne, fed up with Jimmy's antics, gave in. So, they sat in the elevator for quite some time, dealing with each of Jimmy's cases one by one. By the time the elevator was fixed, Jimmy had only 3 cases left unresolved. After Suzanne left, Jimmy made a deal with the elevator repairman. Jimmy strutted out of the courthouse, unaware that he was about to encounter an important client. When he sees that it's Tuco's man Nacho, Jimmy hangs up the phone first, because he's had a taste of Nacho's power in the first season. Jimmy tried to excuse himself, saying he was busy, but Nacho had already opened the door for him. It seemed there was no avoiding it. Jimmy's promotional campaign had indirectly led to Crazy 8's arrest. To defend Crazy 8, Nacho thought of the slick-talking Jimmy. This was karma in action. Since then, the 2 main threads of the show have officially intersected and the plot is about to get more and more exciting. If you enjoyed watching, be sure to like and follow so you don't miss the upcoming exciting episodes. This is a milestone episode of the classic American TV series Better Call Saul, marking the beginning of the intersection of the 2 main storylines. after Jimmy gradually transforms into Saul. For some reason, the criminal Nacho seeks him out. Although Jimmy's current career path is focused on being a criminal defense attorney for lawbreakers, he is still reluctant to deal with someone like Nacho. After all, Jimmy has previously experienced their ruthlessness. When Jimmy gets into Nacho's car, he breaks out in a cold sweat. He cautiously shifts his seat and notices a gun tucked between the front seats. At this moment, Jimmy's mind is working overtime, looking around for a way to escape, but he doesn't have the guts to run. Soon, Jimmy is taken to a garage, where the enclosed space feels particularly oppressive. Seeing Nacho and Lalo remain silent, Jimmy is the first to break the silence. Thinking that he's here because of some previous conflict with Nacho, Lalo said he was Tuco's cousin. He had heard that Jimmy had the ability to turn black and white upside down, and he wanted Jimmy to do something for him. Lalo wants Jimmy to relay some information to Crazy 8, who has been arrested by the police. Jimmy suggests he could give them a free phone so they could communicate directly, but Lalo insists that having a lawyer deliver the message would be more effective. Unable to argue, Jimmy tries to raise his attorney fee in an attempt to get Lalo to reject him. After some serious-sounding but absurd calculations, Jimmy quotes $7,925. However, for criminals, any problem that can be solved with money is not really a problem. Lalo immediately pulls out $8,000 and hands it to Jimmy, telling him to keep the change. Greedy Jimmy reluctantly accepts the money. After all, high risks come with high rewards, which seems fair enough. That evening, Jimmy returns home but doesn't tell Kim about this incident. Kim seems to be in a good mood because her cases tomorrow involve providing pro bono defense for those in need. Jimmy raises a toast to Kim's sense of justice. Here the director gives multiple shots of Kim looking at the bottle of wine on the railing, which also serves as a setup for a later storyline. Kim asks about Jimmy's day at work, but he gives vague and evasive answers. It's clear to anyone listening that things didn't go well, but Jimmy remains relatively optimistic, stating that his financial earnings for the day were quite substantial. Meanwhile, Mike, having parted ways with Gus, hasn't found his next job yet. His daughter-in-law Stacy calls, asking Mike to help watch his granddaughter Kaylee. Mike gladly agrees, as there's nothing that makes him happier than spending time with his granddaughter. However, innocent Kaylee brings up the topic of her deceased father today, accidentally touching a deep wound in Mike's heart. As a result, Mike couldn't control his emotions and threw a tantrum at his adorable granddaughter.
I told you to make those even.
I am.
No, you're not. You're making a mess. You either do it right or you don't do it.
But I want to do it.
You're done. You are done.
This is the first time Mike has ever gotten angry with his granddaughter. When Stacy returns from work that evening, she notices that Mike seems a bit off, but the taciturn Mike doesn't offer much explanation. Mike then heads to a bar to drown his sorrows, drinking until the wee hours of the morning. On his way home, he encounters a group of thugs who decide to target the drunken Mike. However, to their surprise, this old man can really fight.
So?
Meanwhile, Nacho's father, Manuel, confronts Nacho, saying that someone has recently offered a high price to buy his auto repair shop. Manuel suspects that the person was sent by Nacho and guesses that Nacho is trying to get him to run away together, but Manuel firmly states that he will never escape with Nacho. This puts Nacho in a difficult position, as it seems he must continue working as Gus's informant to ensure his father's safety. On the other side, Jimmy, acting as a lawyer, visits Crazy 8 at the police station. When Crazy 8 hears that Jimmy was sent by Lalo, he quickly swears that he hasn't said anything. Jimmy tells Crazy 8 to stay calm and shows him what Lalo wants him to see. The scene shifts to DEA Captain Hank arriving at the police station with his colleague Steven. It turns out that Lalo wants Crazy 8 to report Gus's stash house to the authorities, in order to weaken Gus's influence in the north. Lalo knows that only if Gus can't bring in profit for the boss can he make a move against Gus. However, before Crazy 8 can disclose any important information, Jimmy arrives just in time. He accuses Hank and Steven of negotiating without the presence of Crazy 8's lawyer and demands they leave immediately. Hank replies that Crazy 8 has waived his right to a lawyer, but Jimmy doesn't believe him. However, Crazy 8 insists he wants to confess to them. This leads to an argument between Jimmy and Crazy 8 in front of Hank and Steven. Unbeknownst to them, this is all part of Jimmy's pre-rehearsed plan to put on a show for Hank and Steven. After the argument, Jimmy pretends to concede, but Hank feels played and decides to leave with Steven. Seeing that Hank and Steven are serious about leaving, Jimmy hastily relents and calls them back. Hank wasn't going to fall for that easily, and he made a condition. The information provided had to enable them to arrest people. Jimmy and Crazy 8, though hesitant, have no choice but to agree to Hank's terms, as this is the task assigned by their boss, Lalo. Thus, Crazy 8 becomes a DEA informant, which aligns with the storyline in Breaking Bad. After the DEA discovers Crazy 8 is missing, Hank laments the loss of their informant. After completing the task, Jimmy reports back to Lalo, emphasizing how cooperative Crazy 8 was with Lalo's demands, aiming to protect Crazy 8's life. Lalo was impressed with Jimmy's reliability and considers using him again in the future. As Lalo was about to leave, Jimmy claims he's too busy and requests that Lalo find another lawyer, but this isn't Jimmy's decision to make. Lalo is confident that Jimmy will make time for him. Jimmy wonders what he's gotten himself into. Nacho advises him not to inquire too much, as once on a criminal ship, there's no getting off. Meanwhile, Kim, who is defending community cases, receives a call from her boss, Rick. Kim thought she had the day off, but she's urged to handle the Mesa Verde Bank case since the bank is the firm's major client. This time, the bank's expansion is blocked by a stubborn homeowner, and they need a lawyer to mediate. Kim knocks on the door for a while before an old man slowly opens it. Everett is firm, making Kim negotiate from the doorway as he pulls up a chair to sit. Negotiating under such conditions is nearly impossible. Soon, Kim is driven out by Everett. As Kim is about to leave, Everett sarcastically comments that she's the type to do some bad deeds and then donate a little money to make up for it. This remark infuriates Kim.
Listen to me. You do not get to make up your own rules. Put on your big boy pants and face reality. No one is mistreating you here. We were trying to meet you halfway. Well, that's over. And you know what happens after that? The sheriff comes out and kicks you out of here, and you get nothing. Do you think you're special? A contract means something. It's the law, and it's enforceable. Deal with it.
Paige feels that Kim has done her part, though the negotiation failed. On the way back, Kim keeps thinking about Everett's words. She believes Everett is part of an underprivileged group, and she shouldn't be siding with the bank to bully him. So, Kim returns to Everett's place, helping him find some cost-effective housing options, trying to assist in whatever way she can, but Everett seems ungrateful. Kim shares a heartbreaking story from her childhood, trying to connect with Everett. Unexpectedly, Everett sees this as another one of Kim's fabricated lies.
You'll say anything to get what you want, won't you?
This remark truly hurts Kim, because when she used to con people with Jimmy, lies would work. Now, when she's telling the truth, she's taken for a liar. When Kim returns home, she sees Jimmy drinking alone on the balcony. She lights a cigarette. Today, things didn't go well for either of them. Without saying a word, they understand each other's feelings through their expressions. They share a cigarette as usual. Jimmy made a gesture to pretend to throw the bottle, but this time Kim suddenly unleashed herself. She demonstrates by throwing a bottle first, and Jimmy follows suit. The last time they drank on the balcony, the director showed Kim looking at the bottles on the railing, foreshadowing this scene. Such techniques are commonly used by directors, with many similar scenes in Breaking Bad. They throw more bottles, getting increasingly into it, until a neighbor spots them and they retreat inside. They feel a genuine joy in breaking the rules, setting the stage for their increasingly wayward path. Meanwhile, Nacho, under Gus's control, reveals Lalo's strategy. Hearing the reported time and place of the deal, Tyrus instinctively wants to call and cancel it, but Tyrus fails to consider the bigger picture. If the DEA finds nothing, Lalo will know there's a mole. Putting Nacho in danger, Gus would rather sacrifice money than lose the undercover operative who has close ties with Lalo.
The dead drops remain.
To get back at his former boss, Howard, Jimmy spends money on a few bowling balls and hurls them at Howard's house. The first ball misses entirely. He quickly peeks through the front gate, spots Howard's cherished Jaguar, and with all his might, throws the second ball. The second ball hits the hood squarely, and Jimmy grins mischievously. He quickly climbed up the gate to survey his handiwork and made a victory gesture. He throws the last bowling ball with full force, smashing the car window perfectly. A bewildered Howard comes to the balcony, seeing his beloved car wrecked, countless curses running through his mind. Jimmy did this because Howard's recent antics had infuriated him. Previously, Howard had intended to bring Jimmy into his firm, but Jimmy had no interest in working for HHM. Jimmy had ambitious plans to start his own practice as a criminal defense lawyer specializing in defending criminals. When he learned that Jimmy was practicing under the name Saul Goodman, Howard thought that HHM had let Jimmy down before. They should have hired Jimmy as a lawyer, but due to Chuck's interference, Jimmy never got the chance. Howard admitted past mistakes and offered Jimmy a position at the firm. Jimmy paused and said that after all that had happened between them, working together now would feel awkward, but Howard said it was all between you and your brother. Hearing this, Jimmy was speechless and subtly declined Howard's offer by referring to his experiences at DM. However, Howard still believed Jimmy wanted to work at his firm. Thinking it was the reason Jimmy pursued a law degree, Howard felt that Jimmy's style matched HHM's future expansion needs and wanted Jimmy's help. But Howard didn't realize that his attitude made Jimmy very uncomfortable. To Jimmy, it seemed that Howard was disregarding his choices and only considering his own interests, as if he were doing Jimmy a favor by offering him the job. So, Jimmy decided to teach Howard a lesson. The bowling ball incident was Jimmy's first move in pranking Howard. A few days later, Jimmy hired 2 prostitutes to play a prank on Howard while he was working with his partners.
Can I help you?
Howie, you know.
I don't know them. Ladies, I don't know you. This is some sort of mistake, so.
Yeah, we made a mistake, all right. Joe Dog ain't happy. You owe us.
Owe you?
Yeah. Oh. You can't take a ride on a Carnival cruise and only pay for a tugboat. You know what I'm saying?
Jimmy was so happy to see Howard make a fool of himself and watch from the outside. Jimmy didn't realize his actions were excessive. Instead, he felt quite clever. Meanwhile, because Kim couldn't persuade Everett to relocate, she proposed a new bank site to the client. Kim argued the advantages of the new location from all angles, but Kevin and Paige rejected the proposal. After all, a lot of resources had already been invested in the original site, which legally belonged to Mesa Verde Bank. Kevin stated he wouldn't change his strategy because of a single holdout. Kim is doing this to protect the vulnerable, but unfortunately she doesn't have the power to decide and she has to accept the reality. However, Kim wasn't willing to give up. Her current goal was to help the underprivileged, so she turned to Jimmy for assistance. After discussing with Jimmy, they decided to give Mesa Verde Bank a hard time. The plan began with Jimmy, as a lawyer, visiting Everett's house. Everett, thinking Jimmy was there to pressure him into compromising, refused to let him in, but Jimmy expressed his own hatred for Mesa Verde Bank. Seeing that the lawyer was on his side, Everett agreed to let Jimmy defend him. The next day, when the construction team arrived to start work, Jimmy stopped them by claiming they had the wrong address. The sheriff executing the eviction order confirmed the address was 1130. This is also shown in this shot of Kim's first visit to Everett's house, when the post on the mailbox at Everett's front door says 1130, while the current post has nothing on it, which is obviously a temporary replacement of the post by Jimmy. This is Jimmy's specialty. Previously, to help Kim win back the Mesa Verde Bank case, Jimmy used the same address switching trick against Howard and Chuck. The contractor was certain this was 1130 and insisted he wasn't mistaken, but Everett asserted his house was 1240. The sheriff asked if Everett had any proof, and Everett produced envelopes from the mailbox, all addressed to 1240. The contractor claimed that anyone could print such envelopes, so they couldn't be used as evidence, but as a lawyer Jimmy suggested that the sheriff or investigate before carrying out the task. After all, he cannot afford the responsibility of the wrong. Thus, Jimmy's delaying tactic worked, causing the construction team to incur idle time costs. Word of this quickly reached Kevin. Although the ruse was soon resolved, Kevin saw the day's delay as a victory for Everett. Just when Kevin thought construction could resume the next day, Kim confessed that Everett's lawyer was her boyfriend, Jimmy. In order to avoid suspicion, Kim asked to be removed from the project and have someone else handle it. But Kevin saw this as Everett's ploy. He believed Everett felt threatened by Kim's strong negotiation tactics and brought in Jimmy to force Kim off the project. Thinking he had figured it all out, Kevin refused to replace Kim. Little did he know, this was exactly Kim and Jimmy's plan. That evening, when they got home, Kim shared the day's events with Jimmy. Hearing that Kevin took the bait, Jimmy became intrigued, curious about Kevin's reaction. So, Jimmy had Kim mimic Kevin's actions and tone while he played Kim's role.
Lawyer comes in, crazy comes out. I need that call center real bad.
Of course, Kevin.
Wait, are you being me?
Yes, this is you. Yes, go on, go on.
No, you do whatever it takes. I don't like waiting one bit. Never have, never will. Bottom line, breaking ground. More statues. Kim, you get him now. Blah, 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 blah.
Seeing Kim's spot-on imitation, the humorous Jimmy couldn't resist adding a few comments. Meanwhile, the unemployed Mike planned to visit Kaylee again, but Stacy, sensing he wasn't quite himself lately, texted him not to come. Mike didn't see the message and insisted that he would apologize to Kaylee for losing his temper last time, but Stacy's response made him feel like an outsider.
Let you get back to yourself.
Get back to myself?
Something's going on with you. I don't know what, but I'd be more comfortable if you didn't sit for Kaylee. For tonight.
Hearing this, Mike didn't offer much explanation and angrily left. Like before, Mike drank heavily into the night and ran into the same group of thugs. Because they failed last time, they decided to teach the old man a lesson. At first, Mike managed to take down 2 of them, but outnumbered, he was soon overwhelmed and knocked to the ground. Worse, one of the thugs pulled out a knife and stabbed Mike in the abdomen. Fortunately, the wound wasn't fatal, and Mike was saved. When he awoke, he found himself in a mysterious courtyard. The question is, who saved the critically injured Mike? If TV shows had rankings, this show would definitely be in the top 3. This is Better Call Saul, a show that has maintained high ratings for 5 seasons. It is also the prequel to Breaking Bad, which holds the title of the highest-rated TV show in history. The tightly woven plot of both series not only leaves viewers in awe but also deeply ingrains each character in our hearts. A friendly reminder, don't watch it in the bathroom, as you might end up with numb legs from sitting too long. Following on from the previous episode, Mike wakes up from his coma to find himself in the high slopes of Mexico. Mike enters a house and asks the cooking lady for the exact address. However, she responds in fluent Spanish, indicating she doesn't understand Mike's question. Mike tries to make a phone call, and the woman seems to understand a bit, saying the phone can only make local calls and reminding him not to move too much, or his wounds will reopen. Mike asks if Gus brought him here, but the woman seems unaware of who Gus is. Seeing that his inquiries are fruitless, Mike decides to leave on foot. He walks for half a day without getting far. When he sits down to make a call, he finds his phone has run out of battery. Disappointed, he puts the phone back in his pocket. Mike wonders why Gus is always lurking in the shadows, watching him. At this moment, Mike found an old car coming in his direction. The person who gets out of the car is Gus's doctor, Barry. Mike met Barry when he first collaborated with Gus, and Barry's arrival confirms Mike's suspicions. Barry complains that all the effort he put into bandaging Mike's wounds was wasted. Mike wants to understand why Gus saved him, but Barry says Gus only instructed him to keep Mike alive and urges Mike to come back with him. After a moment's hesitation, Mike agrees to Barry's request. After returning, Barry retreated Mike's wounds. Mike notices the medical equipment here is very comprehensive and guesses that Gus funded it all. Mike believes that this house is where Gus is hiding his contraband, but Barry says there's nothing like that here, only his prescriptions, and that the people here don't have weapons. Mike wants to leave, and Barry doesn't stop him. Instead, he tells him the exact route to Albuquerque. Barry still suggests Mike rest here and recover before leaving. Stubbornly, Mike ignores Barry's advice. As soon as Barry leaves, Mike grabs his coat and prepares to leave again. However, just as Mike walks out of the village, a group of kids coming home from school runs by, and a girl accidentally bumps into him, dropping her bag. Mike carefully picks up the bag. Seeing the innocent smiles of the children changed Mike's impression of the place, so he followed Barry's advice and stayed here to recuperate. As Mike's figure fades away, the camera slowly pans to a water feature with the inscription dedicated to Max. Anyone who has watched Breaking Bad knows that Max was Gus's beloved, who was killed by Hector. This place was also funded by Gus in memory of Max. After returning, Mike attempts to call Gus, but the international call doesn't go through. Mike then starts to prepare a homemade charger to use his phone. The woman sees what Mike is trying to do and helps him find a phone charger. Seeing this, Mike's attitude finally changes, and he thanks the stranger in Spanish. He successfully gets in touch with Gus.
Hello.
You know who this is?
How are you feeling? Better, I trust.
You don't do anything without a reason. Why am I here?
Now is not a good time.
Mike was a little angry when he heard Gus hang up on him. Meanwhile, Gus is not idle. as Lalo has arranged for Crazy 8 to report Gus's stash house to the DEA. However, what Lalo didn't expect was that Nacho had already been turned by Gus. To protect Nacho, his informant, Gus has to play along and intentionally allows the DEA to discover his operation. Despite Hank's efforts to surround and intercept, the criminals abandoned their vehicle and fled, leaving Hank's team with only a few $100,000 in cash. This was exactly Gus's plan. Losing some money is acceptable, but they couldn't take his man. Upon hearing of the plan's success, the cautious Gus immediately destroys the phone. A few days later, when Mike had almost recovered, his mood gradually calmed down. Gus came here to meet with Mike. Mike knows that Gus wants him to become his enforcer, but ever since the basement construction was halted due to Lalo's arrival, along with Werner's death, Mike felt that he and Gus were no longer on the same path. Mike feels Gus is somewhat hypocritical, funding this village to atone for his sins, but Gus said that the people of the village didn't know he was funding it and that it existed only to honor the memory of one man. That person is his tragically deceased boyfriend, Max. Gus confessed that Mike was currently at a crossroads in his life. On one side, he faced his family's lack of understanding, leading him to drink heavily and get into fights with thugs. The outcome of this path was predictable. On the other hand, he offers Mike the option to fight for him, as he needs a warrior like Mike. However, Mike feels that helping one criminal kill another goes against his principles. Gus reminds Mike of the nature of the Salamanca family, implying they deserve their fate. Mike asks why Gus specifically chose him. Gus gives a shocking answer. Mike would understand his vengeance plan because Mike once avenged his son. It seems Gus has thoroughly investigated Mike's background. Because of his deep empathy for revenge and various other reasons, Mike chose to continue working with Gus. A few days later, Nacho, having obtained new intelligence, arranges a meeting with Gus. This time, Nacho brings explosive news. Lalo plans to gradually take over Gus's business until the bosses in the South see Gus as worthless. Gus quickly makes emergency arrangements with his man, then gives Mike a knowing look. Mike understands the signal. It's time to deal with Lalo. Gus instructs Nacho to report directly to Mike from now on and to follow all of Mike's instructions. From this point on, Mike becomes Nacho's immediate superior. After Gus and his team leave, Nacho runs after Mike to warn him about Gus's ruthlessness. Since Mike and Nacho have known each other for a while, they understand one another quite well. Nacho reveals Gus's despicable tactics, but this doesn't surprise Mike, as he's fully aware of Gus's nature. Mike had warned Nacho long ago that once he chose to get involved, there would be no way out. However, Nacho insists that his father is innocent and that he works for Gus solely to ensure his father's safety. Hearing this, Mike feels helpless but says their immediate priority is to eliminate Lalo, and then they can discuss other conditions. What follows is the showdown between Mike and Lalo, one of the most thrilling parts of this season. Mike pretends to be a customer at the bookstore, but in reality, he is there to find a witness to a murder. After confirming that Lillian is the person he's looking for, Mike pretends to be a private investigator hired by the family of the deceased. Mike gains Lillian's trust by saying he is helping the family find the killer, and then asks her about the scene of the crime. Lillian says she has already told the police everything she knows, but Mike knows the information she provided won't help them find the killer. To push the case forward, the retired cop Mike shows her a photo of the killer Lalo's car and asks if she saw this car at the scene. Lillian tries to remember and confirms that the car was there at the time. Worried that Lillian might not know the name of the car, Mike intentionally gives her a hint, hoping she will provide this clue to the police investigating the case. Lillian says she doesn't know the detective's phone number, but the meticulous Mike is already prepared. It seems Mike came well prepared, and his real goal is to get Lalo of the Salamanca family arrested, so Gus's business remains unaffected. Next, Mike sneaks into the police station, intentionally placing a file under the desk and scolding a young employee for not putting it away properly, telling him to quickly hand it to Detective Tim, who was in charge of the murder case. The file is about the hit-and-run incident when Lalo was tailing Mike. Coincidentally, this car matches the one the woman mentioned, and the time and location align perfectly. The police then focus on Lalo's car. To speed up Lalo's arrest, Mike receives intelligence from Nacho about Lalo's location. Mike then enters the police radio channel and reports Lalo's position. At this moment, Lalo has no idea he has fallen into Mike's trap. Seeing the police car approaching from behind, Lalo instinctively reaches for his gun, but soon realizes two more police cars are blocking him from the front, with another police car coming from behind. It seems Lalo has no way to escape. Lalo drops his gun, turns off the engine, and throws the keys out of the car. Meanwhile, Kim, in an effort to help Everett, colludes with Jimmy to deceive her banking client. Jimmy, as Everett's defense attorney, works with Kim to make Kevin look bad. However, Jimmy doesn't believe this is the right thing to do. He's only cooperating with Kim and advises her to stop. But Kim is already on a roll and wants to see the battle through to the end. Jimmy assists Kim by hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on Kevin, although Jimmy feels he hasn't found any important clues. The clever Kim notices a photo of a cowboy on a horse, and suddenly an idea forms in her mind. The logo for Mesa Verde Bank comes from this photo, but the photographer is someone else. The next day, Jimmy brings in his old partner to help realize his idea. With time running out, Jimmy wants the work done by tomorrow, but camera guy says it's impossible because Jimmy's requirements are too complex. However, Jimmy is resourceful and always finds a way. Jimmy quickly thinks of using a green screen to shoot, which can be done in one location. So, Jimmy gathers some temporary actors and starts filming at a nail salon overnight. But just as Jimmy is about to finish shooting, Kim rushes in. She says the mission is aborted because her boss, Rick, has seen through their ruse. Although he didn't say anything directly, it was clear he knew. However, Jimmy feels it's a shame because he believes the plan is flawless and has already put in a lot of effort. But since Kim insists, Jimmy reluctantly agrees. What Kim didn't expect was that during the negotiations, Jimmy suddenly demands $4 million in compensation for Everett to relocate. He continues with Kim's plan, thinking that this way, no one would suspect Kim while also securing greater benefits for Everett. This was also Kim's original intention in doing this. Although the plan worked and Kevin compromised, Jimmy wanted to invite Kim to celebrate the victory. But what Jimmy doesn't know is that Kim is already angry with him for acting unilaterally. She feels Jimmy has tricked her. Although Kim wants to help Everett, she also doesn't want her client to suffer such a big loss. Jimmy doesn't truly understand Kim's intention and instead follows his own logic, thinking he protected Kim. Seeing Kim very angry, Jimmy quickly apologizes and promises never to do it again. But at this point, Kim no longer believes him, and they start a big argument.
I don't believe you. You lie. I lie. This has to end. I cannot keep living like this.
No.
Jimmy, shut up. Jimmy. You know this has to change. If you don't see it, I don't know what to say because we are at a breaking point.
God.
Either we end this now, and enjoy the time we had and go our separate ways, or we're...
What?
Or maybe we get married.
This twist came unexpectedly. Kim decides to marry Jimmy because she loves him and doesn't want to leave him. After getting married, they no longer keep secrets from each other, with Huel as their witness. They have a simple wedding in the courthouse. Afterward, they immediately dive back into work. Jimmy receives a call from Nacho, stating that a client needs his defense. This client is none other than the newly arrested Lalo. Facing strong evidence, even having a lawyer present is useless, and the judge decides to deny bail. Jimmy knows it's impossible to win this case, but he must act as if he's taking it very seriously. He suggests Lalo take the plea deal offered by the DA, but Lalo firmly refuses. He wants Jimmy to find a way to get him out on bail. Lalo hints to Jimmy that if he aligns himself with their group, he will have limitless wealth. This episode also echoes Breaking Bad when Saul is kidnapped by Walter and Jesse, who he thinks are sent by Lalo. This time, Jimmy doesn't keep it from Kim. He confesses to her that he is defending Lalo. Kim feels very relieved by Jimmy's honesty and hopes he will continue to be open with her. Then they start celebrating their newlywed happiness. They thought everything would be fine once they got Lalo in jail, but they didn't expect him to get his hands on a phone while inside. Lalo contacted Nacho and gave him a task. Nacho then passed this information on to Mike. The task Nacho received was to find a way to burn down one of Gus's chicken restaurants. Upon hearing this, Mike immediately reported the news to Gus. At that moment, Gus was attending a major meeting at Madrigal, led by Peter, the head of the company's food division. Gus brought his new dipping sauce to the meeting. On the surface, they are business partners, but secretly, they are building a vast contraband empire. Gus's secret construction of an underground factory was for this purpose. They plan to use Madrigal's logistics to transport contraband worldwide. This ties in with the events in Breaking Bad, where after Gus's downfall, the DEA followed the leads to Madrigal, and Peter, knowing he was doomed, committed suicide in the bathroom. Peter thought that once Lalo was in jail, Gus's underground project could resume. However, Gus explained that Lalo was still causing trouble even in prison, ordering his men to burn down one of Gus's chicken restaurants. Overhearing this, Lydia suggests that Gus find a way for Lalo to die in prison. This aligns with her malicious character in Breaking Bad. However, Lydia's idea was too simplistic. Gus explains that if anything happens to a member of the Salamanca family in the north, the Mexican cartel will blame him, leading to unimaginable consequences. So Gus decides to change tactics and find a way to send Lalo back to Mexico so he can continue his project in peace. Gus then arranged for Mike to contact Lalo's lawyer, Jimmy, and have Jimmy find a way to bail Lalo out, providing Jimmy with some information. Although Jimmy was reluctant, he couldn't afford to offend these people and had no choice but to comply, to cooperate with Lalo's orders to Nacho. Gus was even willing to burn down his own restaurant. Nacho arrived at the chicken restaurant, recklessly destroying everything inside. As if venting his frustration towards Gus, Gus arrived at the restaurant and turned on the gas, then picked up a fresh frozen chicken, heated the frying oil to a boil, and created a little slide for the chicken. As the tray's temperature rose, the thawed chicken began to slide down slowly. Just as Gus stepped outside, the spark from the fryer instantly ignited the entire restaurant. It must be said, Gus was willing to do anything to achieve his goals. The next day, Jimmy brought new evidence to appeal for Lalo, and he even brought a few people pretending to be Lalo's family members. Jimmy reminded Lalo to act a bit timid later on, as this might help his chances of getting bail. However, fear was never a part of Lalo's life creed. Seeing the victim's family, Jimmy felt a pang of conscience, but he knew the consequences of not defending Lalo outweighed his professional ethics. Jimmy argued that the librarian's testimony was coerced, something the police could verify, as Lillian was indeed guided by Mike. Of course, Mike had used a fake name. After Jimmy's elaborate arguments, the opposing lawyer requested a private discussion to give Jimmy an out. The judge agreed to grant Lalo bail, but the bail amount was set at a staggering $7 million, cash only. Hearing this, Jimmy couldn't stay calm. It was clear they didn't want to release Lalo, but to Jimmy's shock, Lalo said he could pay the bail, but needed Jimmy to fetch the money for him. After the hearing, Jimmy secretly observed the victim's family. His conscience once again pricked. The shiny wall reflected Jimmy's contorted face, symbolizing his conflicted emotions at that moment. Just then, Howard suddenly approached Jimmy, pretending to ask how Jimmy was considering the job offer he had given him. Jimmy had almost forgotten about it and said he was still considering, but Howard insisted he shouldn't consider it. Howard had discovered that Jimmy had been messing with him. Jimmy played dumb, saying Howard was acting strange. From Howard's perspective, he thought Jimmy had a psychological problem and expressed sympathy for Jimmy's situation. Hearing this, Jimmy couldn't contain his anger.
You kill my brother, and you say you're sorry? Big job at the illustrious HHM. Chance to play at the palace. Little old me? You have no idea what's going on. You're a teensy tiny man in a teensy weensy little bubble.
Oh, Jimmy.
Oh, don't you Jimmy me.
Seeing Jimmy's irrational behavior, Howard turned to leave. But Jimmy, already in a foul mood, unleashed his frustration on Howard. He felt that someone born into wealth like Howard could never understand what he had been through. Jimmy's grotesque and twisted outburst reminded one of Chuck's awkward court incident. After Howard left, Jimmy met with Lalo again. Lalo gave Jimmy the exact address to retrieve the $7 million, noting that the contacts were Lalo's cousins. The cousins, Jimmy suggested having them bring the money directly, but Lalo disagreed, insisting the whole thing needed to be handled very discreetly. If those two guys showed up, their rivals would find out. Jimmy recommended Nacho, but Lalo didn't trust Nacho. He was worried that Nacho might run off with the $7 million. However, Jimmy was a small-time player who wouldn't dare to do such a thing. Jimmy was the perfect choice. Seeing that he couldn't refuse, Jimmy reluctantly asked for $100,000 for the errand, considering this was less than 2% of the $7 million. Lalo thought for a moment and agreed to Jimmy's terms. Back home, Jimmy didn't hide this from Kim. When Kim hears that he's supposed to pick up $7 million for a thug, she tries her hardest to stop him, regardless of how high the commission is. However, under Jimmy's persuasion, Kim had no choice but to agree. Early the next morning, Jimmy quickly found the location Lalo had specified. Before the contact arrived, Jimmy checked his appearance, knowing that the people he was about to meet were no ordinary individuals. This scene was reminiscent of one in Breaking Bad, where, seeing a bit of dust on his shoes, Jimmy extravagantly used bottled water to clean them. Little did he know that this action would come to haunt him. Soon, the cousins arrived, confirming that Jimmy was the lawyer sent by Lalo. They handed him 2 large bags of cash without a word. seeing that he was about to easily earn a commission of $100,000. Jimmy hummed a tune all the way back, but his joy was premature. He hadn't gone far before an SUV started tailing him. Jimmy waved, signaling for them to overtake. Completely unaware of the impending danger, a man is rushing with a client's $7 million bail money. Jimmy thought he could easily earn $100,000 commission, but halfway through, he was stopped by 3 off-road vehicles, and the robbers were all loaded. They quickly surrounded Jimmy. As a lowly lawyer, Jimmy had never seen such a scene before, and he was scared out of his wits. The head robber, Chief, signaled Jimmy to get out of the car. Jimmy had no choice but to comply. He raised his hands nervously and tried to explain in broken Spanish that he was a lawyer. However, the robbers didn't care who he was. They just wanted to take the $7 million ransom. After confirming the cash was fine, Chief immediately ordered his men to kill the lawyer. Facing imminent death, Jimmy was terrified out of his mind. But just as Jimmy was about to be killed, there was a swoosh, and blood splattered all over him. The one who died was the person about to kill Jimmy. Realizing there was a sniper, the robbers immediately became vigilant. As the second robber was shot dead, they started shooting wildly, but it was all in vain because they had no idea where the sniper was. Chief, out of ammo, tried to escape with the money but was shot dead in one hit. The mysterious sniper's bullets hit the enemy's vital points with precision, and soon there was no more movement from the group. Jimmy hid beside the car, not daring to move, fearing he would be shot too. From under the car, he saw a pickup truck approaching. It seemed this person was also after the money. Jimmy picked up a gun from the ground for self-defense, but the bullets were already used up. At this moment, one of the robbers, who hadn't died, started shooting wildly at the pickup truck, covering his escape. Mystery Man got out of the truck and saw that there was still one more survivor and shot him again. Then the man walked toward Jimmy, who was too scared to lift his head. Unexpectedly, the man didn't intend to kill Jimmy but instead asked if he was hit. The voice sounded familiar. The terrified Jimmy slowly raised his head. To his surprise, the mysterious sharpshooter was his old acquaintance, Mike. Knowing he was so skilled, he never should have crossed him back then. Mike helped the frightened Jimmy up, told him to take a moment, and went to clean up the battlefield. Jimmy held back his tears. Mike noted the tattoos on the robbers' bodies, then picked up the $7 million in cash to put it in his truck. But to Mike's surprise, his car had been hit in a critical spot by the last fleeing robber, rendering it inoperable. Just as Mike was frowning in frustration, he spotted Jimmy's car keys. Although Jimmy's car had also taken a few bullets, fortunately, Mike managed to start it up. It seemed the two would have to rely on this beat-up Suzuki to get home. However, before they had gone very far, the car started to give out. Mike got out to check it out and found the engine had been shot. Even more desperate was the fact that, in this remote border area, there was no cell signal, so he couldn't call for help. Mike removes Jimmy's license plate. Then he removes the petrol cap because it's fitted with a tracking locator, and it's based on this that Mike saved Jimmy's life. This was also a common tactic of Gus's gang. To avoid revealing their situation, they needed to push the car into the ditch. Just when the car was about to be pushed into the ditch, Jimmy suddenly called a halt because he remembered that the cup of the world's second-best lawyer that Kim had given him was still in the car. Seeing the mug pierced by a bullet, Jimmy was heartbroken. Then the two of them pushed the car into the ditch together. To avoid being discovered by the enemy, Mike, who was skilled in wilderness survival, chose to take the small paths. Thus, the two walked for half a day, panting with exhaustion. Finally, they found a tree and decided to rest for a while. Seeing Jimmy's condition reminded me of Walter. Both were surviving in the wild, but Jimmy's situation was clearly much more dangerous. To conserve energy, Jimmy suggested they take turns carrying the $7 million in cash. Mike gave him a look that said impossible, and Jimmy had to give up. He came up with another idea, to dig a hole and bury the money here, then come back for it later when they returned to civilization. But Mike didn't think much of this idea. First, the coordinates of the buried money would be hard to find. Second, the ground here was very hard, and with just the car license plate, it would take ages to dig. But Jimmy didn't listen to Mike's advice and insisted on doing it. Just then, Mike saw a car approaching in the distance. He observed through his binoculars and confirmed it was the car of the escaping robber. Mike told Jimmy to stop immediately and remove anything reflective, as the enemy might spot them through the glint of light. Mike concluded that the enemy had found their abandoned car and started searching the area. For safety, the two had to quickly change their position. When they found a safe resting place, the thirsty Jimmy drank water in big gulps. Mike, beside him, reminded him to drink sparingly because in this godforsaken desert, lack of water is more dangerous than any enemy. With his rich experience in field survival, Mike found ways to collect moisture from plants and decided they should rest there for the night. As traveling at night would be extremely dangerous, Jimmy climbed to a high point, hoping his phone could get a signal, but he was ultimately disappointed. At night, Jimmy complained that he should have been home by now. He knew Kim must be very worried about him by now. Mike tried to reassure him, joking that Kim might think he was out fooling around, but Jimmy retorted that Kim would definitely think he was in danger because she knew about his mission. Mike inferred from Jimmy's words that he had told his girlfriend about what he was doing. Jimmy proudly corrected him, saying she was not his girlfriend but his wife. Mike congratulated him and then speculated that Kim might call the police, which would be a normal reaction to fear, but Jimmy knew Kim very well and assured him that she wouldn't call the police. Just worry. Hearing this, Mike felt sorry that Kim was also drawn into this mess. For Kim's safety, Jimmy adamantly insisted that she had nothing to do with any of this. The next day, just as Jimmy predicted, Kim didn't call the police. Instead, she posed as a member of Lalo's legal team to visit him. Kim wanted Lalo to tell her Jimmy's location. At first, Lalo was furious at Jimmy's betrayal, but when he learned that Kim was Jimmy's wife, he understood why she was so worried. Kim promised to abide by lawyer-client confidentiality, but Lalo didn't think it necessary to tell Kim anything. He believed Jimmy was tough and told Kim to go home and wait patiently. Meanwhile, Mike woke up and collected a bit of life-saving water. Seeing Jimmy about to relieve himself, Mike warned him not to waste it because the little water he had collected wasn't enough for the two of them. In the next scene, half a bottle of urine was hanging from Jimmy's waist. Thus, they continued their journey, resting when tired and sipping a tiny amount of water from the bottle cap when thirsty.
No. More. No. You want more?
Jimmy would rather die of thirst than drink his own urine. After a short rest, they continued on their way. Jimmy came up with a good idea to tie the two large bags of money together and drag them behind him. Unfortunately, the bags were of poor quality and soon developed a hole. Mike used Jimmy's license plate to cover the hole. Jimmy, who was picking up money next to him, was accidentally stabbed in the foot by a cactus thorn. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain to pull out the thorn. At this point, Jimmy was on the verge of collapse. He lay on the ground, saying he'd had enough. He wondered why they had to suffer like this when they were going to die anyway. Mike told him to have some homemade black tea, but Jimmy saw no point. Drinking it would only let others know he was a corpse full of urine. Mike encouraged him to get up, but Jimmy couldn't. Jimmy wondered how Mike could keep going, and Mike's words inspired him to regain his strength.
I have people. I have people waiting for me. They don't know what I do. They never will. They're protected. But I do what I do so they can have a better life. And if I live or if I die, it really doesn't make a difference to me as long as they have what they need. So when it's my time to go, I will go knowing I did everything I could for them. Now you ask me how I keep going. That's how.
Just then, Mike noticed a car approaching in the distance. Through his binoculars, he saw that it was the robbers again. Mike warned Jimmy not to move until the enemies left, but Jimmy, bolstered by Mike's pep talk, decisively picked up Mike's space blanket and draped it over himself to draw the robbers' attention, giving Mike a chance to ambush and kill them. Mike understood and quickly got ready. Jimmy's only motivation to stay alive was knowing he had a wife waiting for him at home. He couldn't let Kim become a widow. With his energy depleted, Mike's first shot missed. Seeing the car about to hit Jimmy, Mike took a deep breath and fired a second shot, hitting the car squarely. Their immediate crisis was averted. Mike checked the situation of the enemy. This time he didn't shoot again. It seems that the enemy is already dead. Unfortunately, the robbers' water bottles had broken during the vehicle rollover. Jimmy had no choice but to drink his homemade iced tea to stave off hunger. Though the taste was indescribable, it was his hope for making it out of the desert alive. His wife was waiting for him at home, and he still had to deliver the $7 million to the client. Seeing Jimmy regain his spirits, Mike felt reassured and slung his sniper rifle over his shoulder to continue their journey. The director puts Jimmy and Kim in the same frame. To see his wife again, Jimmy gritted his teeth and kept checking his phone for a signal in the desert. Kim, hoping for news from her husband, smoked through several packs and kept praying for Jimmy to call, though they had temporarily lost contact. They were constantly thinking of each other. Fortunately, it wasn't long before Jimmy's phone got a signal, which delighted him. He immediately called Kim. Kim was overjoyed to finally hear from Jimmy.
I'm okay.
Hearing Jimmy's voice, Kim choked up, and the weight on her heart was finally lifted. Jimmy and Mike reached the nearest service area and changed into clean clothes. Soon the rescue vehicle Mike contacted also arrived here, and it was Gus's men Tyrus and Victor who got out of the car. They called to arrange for the battlefield to be cleaned up and then briefed Jimmy on what to tell Lalo. In the next scene, Jimmy was carrying the $7 million to bail out Lalo. The staff checked and confirmed that the bail amount was $7 million. To her surprise, Jimmy directly brought up 2 large bags of cash. The staff used 3 counting machines to count the cash and still couldn't finish it. The police's defense attorney was stunned by this scene, unable to believe how rich this guy was. They thought $7 million would keep him in jail, but it ended up giving the prisoner a chance to escape. Since it took so long, Lalo wanted to hear Jimmy's explanation. Fortunately, Mike had coached him in advance. Jimmy explained that his car broke down on the way back. Considering that it is not safe to take the big road with $7 million, Jimmy chose to take the small road to the north, and then accidentally lost his way in the desert, which delayed the time. Lalo was initially skeptical, but hearing this made him feel better. He figured someone like Jimmy wouldn't dare lie to him. Jimmy's worried that Lalo's false identity won't stay hidden for long, and the police are sure to keep digging deeper, but Lalo wasn't worried at all. By the time the police discovered the truth, Lalo would already be back in Mexico. Lalo reassured Jimmy not to worry and said they would continue working together in the future. Before leaving, Lalo didn't forget to ask Jimmy if he received the $100,000 commission. Jimmy lifted his bag, indicating he had received it. However, Lalo's next words sent chills down Jimmy's spine.
So make sure you buy something nice for the wife. Man, she's a looker, huh?
My what?
Yeah, the güera, man. She came by to see me. Hey, nice job, eh?
Jimmy knows that Kim wouldn't call the police if she couldn't find him, but he didn't expect her to go to the terrifying Lalo. This meant Kim was now entangled in this dangerous mess as well. Back home, Kim thoughtfully prepared an oatmeal bath for Jimmy to help with inflammation. Jimmy warned Kim to stay away from people like Lalo. He was already involved and didn't want Kim to be in any danger. Jimmy confessed that he almost couldn't hold on in the desert. The only thing that kept him going was thinking of Kim, but he didn't share the specific details with her. Kim scolded Jimmy, saying it wasn't worth it to do so much for Lalo. Jimmy told her to check the bag he brought home, as it contained the $100,000 commission he earned. Careful Kim also noticed the cup Jimmy brought back. Seeing the bullet hole in it, she realized Jimmy had encountered danger. Meanwhile, Mike reported to Gus. He sketched up the tattoos he saw on the robbers. Gus realized these men were hired hands. Mike wondered who the employer was. Gus then made a call to his superior in the cartel, Juan. Through a brief conversation, Gus confirmed that Juan was the employer. Juan did this to prevent Lalo from being released. On the surface, Juan claimed it was to protect Gus's business, but in reality, he was safeguarding his own interests. When the cousins went to retrieve the $7 million for Lalo's bail, someone had already tipped off Juan. However, Juan didn't know Gus's true intentions. Gus's goal was to drive the Salamancas back to their homeland in Mexico, allowing him to expand his operations in the north. Mike understood Gus's intentions and prepared to leave. At that moment, Mike remembered he had one more thing to report, the matter concerning Nacho. Mike felt that Nacho had completed his mission and deserved to be let go. It was clear Mike was speaking up for Nacho. Mike had dealt with Nacho before and knew he was a man who cared deeply for his father. Mike saw the good in Nacho, much like he saw the goodness in his own son, but Gus didn't agree. He thought it would be better to keep Nacho as his eyes and ears in Salamanca. Mike disagreed with Gus using Nacho's father as leverage. He believed Gus should recruit Nacho by offering him happiness. However, Gus didn't trust Nacho, because back when the incident with Hector occurred, Gus had discovered that Nacho was behind it. Ultimately, Mike was just an employee and couldn't change Nacho's fate. Nacho reported Lalo's next moves to Gus and expressed his desire to end their agreement, but Gus refused. The next day Jimmy, still recovering, gets another call from a client. Kim wanted him to rest at home, but Jimmy insisted on going because the case was urgent and he couldn't abandon his client. Kim suddenly confessed about the situation Jimmy faced in the desert. She explained she wasn't blaming him for keeping it secret. She just wanted him to know she was always there for him. Seeing his understanding, caring, and beautiful wife, Jimmy admitted that he had gone through a terrifying ordeal, but he only vaguely mentioned drinking iced tea. He didn't want Kim to worry about him. After Jimmy left, Kim went to work at SC law firm. After what had happened, she couldn't focus on her work. Kim looked at the room full of Mesa Verde Bank trophies, but they couldn't compare to a thank you letter from someone she had helped. She suddenly realized what she truly needed, so Kim decisively resigned from her job. Then, Kim asked her assistant to send her some pro bono community cases. That was what she genuinely wanted to do. Before leaving, Kim remembered there was one thing she hadn't taken, the stopper from the bottle of Zafiro Anejo. From her and Jimmy's first con, this item was to Kim what Marco's ring was to Jimmy. Whenever they appeared, their way of doing things would break the rules. Before fleeing, Lalo visited the nursing home to say goodbye to Hector. He explained his situation to his uncle and promised he wouldn't let Gus off so easily. Before leaving, he would ensure everything here was taken care of. The Salamanca family, though ruthless, had a bond and unity that many envied. Lalo was finally preparing to withdraw from the north, unaware that Gus's men were watching his every move. Nacho drove Lalo to the border, passing the spot where Jimmy was robbed, now completely cleaned up by Gus's men. Soon, they arrived at the rendezvous point, the same place where Jimmy had received the $7 million from the cousins. Lalo told Nacho he didn't need to wait, as his cousins would come to pick him up. However, just as Nacho was about to leave, Lalo suddenly thought of something Jimmy had said. He got back into Nacho's car and told him to drive slowly to check the spot where Jimmy's car had broken down. Following the tire tracks, Lalo quickly found the car Jimmy had pushed into the ditch. He jumped down to inspect it and, sure enough, found bullet holes. To get to the bottom of things, Lalo decided to return to Albuquerque and confront Jimmy. Meanwhile, Jimmy, not in the best state, lost a case he should have won. As a result, he was ridiculed by Bill. Thinking back, it was always Jimmy mocking others. Slip and Jimmy had never been laughed at like this before. Jimmy couldn't get over it. He found Mike and complained about the mess he was in. Mike could see how bad Jimmy was feeling. He told Jimmy that this was the path he had unknowingly chosen, and since he was already on it, he couldn't change the fact but had to try to adapt to it. Not finding the answer he wanted, Jimmy stormed out of the car. What Jimmy didn't know was that the dangerous Lalo was already on his way back to find him. This is a character in Better Call Saul who kills without hesitation and is also the person Gus fears the most. In order to keep his business from being affected, Gus went to great lengths to get Lalo sent back to his hometown in Mexico. However, the cunning Lalo discovered Jimmy's car on his way back, and the car had multiple bullet holes in it. To get to the bottom of things, Lalo changed his mind and decided to go back and ask Jimmy what happened. At night, just as Jimmy and Kim were having a heated argument over Kim's resignation, they suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. Who could it be at this late hour? Suspicious Kim is ready to answer the door and Jimmy receives a call from Mike, who has already called several times, because Lalo's movements were being monitored by Gus's side. Mike wanted Jimmy to keep the call going and place the phone in a hidden spot to find out why Lalo returned. At first, Jimmy was a bit confused, but when he saw the look on Kim's face, he followed Mike's instructions and placed the phone under the bar. When he opened the door, he found that Lalo had returned. Jimmy asked in confusion, "Weren't you already back in Mexico?" The cunning Lalo said he still had some matters to take care of, and then he walked over to the fish tank and tapped on it. The frightened goldfish inside were just like Jimmy and Kim. Jimmy urged Lalo not to scare the goldfish. After several pleas, Lalo finally stopped and then sat down on the couch. Seeing the gun at Lalo's waist, Jimmy made an excuse that Kim had something to do and was about to leave. But Lalo had no intention of letting Kim go. "Aren't you a legal team?" he asked. Lalo asked Jimmy what happened after he got the money. Jimmy didn't dare tell the truth and instead repeated the detailed explanation he had given before. Lalo was obviously not satisfied with this answer and asked Jimmy to repeat it. At this point, Jimmy was even more scared, but he still did not dare to tell the truth. This time he added the plot of drinking his own urine to the story, but Lalo still didn't hear the answer he wanted. He walked over to the fish tank again and tapped, as if sending a final warning to Jimmy.
Tell me again.
However, Lalo didn't know that he was already in Mike's sniper range. If Lalo made any move to kill, Mike would shoot without hesitation. Mike heard their entire conversation clearly. In this critical moment, Jimmy kept pleading with Lalo to let Kim leave first since this matter had nothing to do with her. Seeing that Jimmy still hadn't gotten to the point, Lalo had to remind him that he had found Jimmy's car. He asked Jimmy if he had pushed his own car into a ditch. Jimmy's answer was somewhat hesitant, and Lalo concluded that Jimmy was hiding something. At this moment, Jimmy panicked a bit, but right at this life-or-death juncture, Kim suddenly erupted.
Okay. Are you kidding me with this?
Kim,
Do you know what he did for you? $7 million of your money. He hauled it across a goddamn desert without one penny missing. And he got you out of jail for a murder that, let's face it, you're definitely guilty of. He did everything you asked and went way beyond what any other lawyer would ever do. So, what exactly is it that you're getting at? What do you want?
Kim instantly boosted their momentum on this side. After hearing Kim out, Lalo didn't beat around the bush and directly revealed that he had found the bullet holes in Jimmy's car, which led him to suspect that Jimmy wasn't telling the truth. Hearing this, Kim was somewhat speechless. She remarked that around here, even a can left outside could be used for target practice, let alone a broken down car. Haven't you ever considered that it might have been some punks who pushed the car into the ditch out of boredom? Kim hit Lalo's sore spot directly, accusing him of not having trustworthy subordinates to help him get the money, which forced a lawyer to take the risk of fetching it from the desert. Kim suggested that it was time for Lalo to clean house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really. If you don't trust your men with your money, you have bigger problems than if you trust Saul Goodman. But next time you have a bunch of money and no one you can trust, leave him out of it, okay? Try a wire transfer, try a shell company, or you've heard of the Cayman Islands, right? Jesus, get your shit together and stop torturing the one man who went through hell to save your ass.
Using her rationality and eloquence, Kim successfully persuaded the dangerous Lalo to leave. Watching Lalo exit Jimmy's apartment, Mike, hiding in the shadows, finally breathed a sigh of relief. Kim's words made Lalo suddenly realize that he truly had no one trustworthy in the north. The only person he could trust was Nacho. So, Lalo changed his strategy and planned to take Nacho back to Mexico with him. He wanted to cultivate a loyal subordinate who could handle things in the north independently. After confirming that Lalo had left, Jimmy remembered that he still hadn't hung up Mike's call.
Hey, did you hear all that?
I heard enough to know she saved your ass.
So what happens next?
We'll see.
Kim, unaware that there was someone else involved, asked Jimmy who he was talking to. Jimmy confessed that it was the person who saved his life in the desert, and then he recounted the events that had happened in the desert to Kim. It was only now that Kim learned the specific details of Jimmy's perilous situation in the desert. Hearing this, Kim hurried forward to comfort Jimmy. For safety's sake, Jimmy suggested they go stay in a hotel. After this ordeal, Jimmy felt deeply guilty for implicating Kim in his troubles. Kim comforted Jimmy and reminded him that he had crossed a line, advising him not to make the same mistake again in the future. The next day, Mike reported to Gus. The good news was that Lalo had already returned to his hometown in Mexico. The bad news was that he had taken Nacho with him. Mike surmised that Lalo intended to put Nacho in an important position, which is why he took him along. Additionally, there was no signal on that side, and Mike had lost contact with Nacho, since Gus had already arranged for mercenaries to massacre the Salamanca family. If Nacho didn't receive the intel, he would also be killed. Mike suggested finding a way to rescue Nacho, but Gus worried that this might expose himself.
The men I've chosen for this are highly skilled. They're the best in their business. But the one thing they do not have is a man on the inside.
Lalo was in the kitchen reprimanding the butler when he suddenly sees the killers outside the window. He instinctively pulls the butler over to stop the bullets, and then he quickly hides behind the wall. Unarmed, Lalo quietly picked up a pot of boiling oil. When the assassins entered the house, Lalo seized the opportunity to throw the pot of oil onto one of the assassins' faces. Hearing the gunshots, another assassin hurried to provide backup. Lalo crawled on the ground, moving forward stealthily. The assassin kept firing but hit nothing. Using his knowledge of the house, Lalo quickly lost the assassin. Seeing his already murdered family members, he took one of their guns for self-defense. Lalo then headed to a relatively hidden bathroom. He pulled on a towel rack, causing the nearby bathtub to automatically open. It turned out that this was the entrance to a tunnel they had dug long ago. Just as Lalo was about to close the bathtub, a counterattack plan suddenly formed in his mind. He deliberately left the tunnel entrance open and quickly ran away. Soon, Lalo emerged from the lawn outside the yard. He closed the exit and limped back towards the house. The assassins discovered the escape tunnel and sent a few people down to pursue him. leaving one person to keep watch above. The assassins thought they would catch up to Lalo quickly, but little did they know that Lalo had already returned. After taking out the lookout, Lalo cautiously looked into the tunnel. Seeing the assassins still running forward, Lalo picked up the lookout's machine gun and started wildly shooting into the tunnel. In this way, Lalo single-handedly eliminated the entire assassination team. One has to admit, his combat skills are truly formidable. No wonder Gus can't eat or sleep peacefully as long as Lalo is alive. The assassin who had been scalded by the oil was still alive. Lalo removed the assassin's mask. The assassin explained that they were hired and didn't know the identity of the real employer. However, Lalo said he knew who did it. He only wanted the assassin to report back and say they had completed the task. Lalo's aim was to make Gus believe he was dead, thereby lowering Gus's guard. This would give Lalo a greater chance for revenge. However, the reason Lalo's family was attacked was that they had become the biggest obstacle to Gus's business expansion. It was also to avenge his brutally murdered friend, Max. For Lalo, everything changed so quickly. Just that morning, he had brought Nacho home. This was the first time Lalo had ever broken his rule to promote someone outside the family. He introduced Nacho to his dearest family members, and the whole family had a great time, chatting and laughing. To promote Nacho, Lalo said he would take him to meet the big boss, Don. At that moment, Nacho's phone vibrated. He discreetly silenced it and made an excuse to go to the bathroom, where he received another call from an unknown person.
Yeah.
A las 3 de la mañana esta noche. Quítale el candado. Ábrelo. Lárgate de ahí.
¿Quién eres?
A las 3 de la mañana. ¿Entiendes?
Tiene por lo menos 7 hombres aquí, pero también hay varios ancianos que nunca le han hecho nada a nadie.
Nacho realized that the caller intended to eliminate everyone, and although some people were innocent, he felt powerless to change anything. To introduce Nacho to Don Iladio, Lalo prepared a generous gift. The gift was a red Ferrari supercar, with the trunk filled with a box full of cash. Seizing a moment when Don was pleased, Lalo called Nacho over and introduced him as his man in the north, and a longtime friend of Tuco, who was currently in prison. Hearing this, Don decided to personally interview Nacho. Nacho, with his calm demeanor, successfully responded to Don's questions. Finally, Don asked him what he wanted, and Nacho told the truth.
Respeto. Quiero tomar mis propias decisiones, seguir mi propio camino. No quiero que nadie ni por un momento piense en jugármela y yo no quiero tener que estar viendo por encima de mis hombros.
Hearing this, Don jokingly said that Nacho was in the wrong line of work, but he didn't understand what Nacho really meant. That night, Nacho secretly picked up a piece of aluminum from a can in the Salamanca family kitchen. Seeing that it was almost 3 a.m., Nacho prepared to act on the intel he had received and then escape. However, when he reached the backyard, he saw that Lalo was still awake. Lalo explained that he rarely sleeps, and that he is most alert when others are asleep. Many of his good ideas come to him during this time. Time was running out, and Nacho needed to find a way to divert Lalo. So, he asked Lalo if there was any stronger liquor, happy to have someone to drink with him late at night. Lalo told Nacho where the liquor was and asked him to fetch it. In the kitchen, Nacho devised a plan to distract Lalo. He poured oil into a frying pan and set it to high heat to produce smoke and draw Lalo's attention. Sure enough, as they began to drink, Lalo noticed the smoke coming from the kitchen. Thinking it was the housekeeper's mistake, he hurried to scold him. Once Lalo went inside, Nacho rushed to unlock the back door. This was his specialty, and Nacho quickly unlocked it. The assassins were already waiting at the door. Seeing the assassins move, Nacho bolted away. Then, the events at the beginning unfolded. After Lalo dealt with all the assassins, he realized that Nacho had betrayed him. It became clear that trusting an outsider was a mistake. Looking at his family, lying dead in pools of blood, an enraged Lalo decided to make them pay for this blood debt. This is the grand finale of the 5th season of the classic TV series Better Call Saul. Throughout the season, as Jimmy focuses his practice on defending criminals, he is inevitably forced to deal with the terrifying Lalo. This wasn't a coincidence, but the inevitable result of his chosen path. Although Jimmy became Lalo's defense attorney, he couldn't control the situation, not even knowing who was behind it all. What terrified him even more was that after surviving in the wilderness, he and Kim faced death threats from Lalo. Jimmy thought someone was targeting him, so he hurried to find Mike for answers. However, after knocking on the door for a long time with no response, Jimmy thought Mike was intentionally avoiding his questions and began to act stubbornly. It seems Jimmy's desert journey fried his brain. Didn't he consider the possibility that Mike might not be home? Because Jimmy's life was saved by Mike. But Mike didn't let Jimmy reveal the truth to Lalo. Jimmy was very puzzled by this and questioned Mike about who was behind it all and why he kept encountering various misfortunes. Mike stated, "This has nothing to do with you. You don't have the clearance to know these things." Jimmy was obviously not satisfied with Mike's answer and felt that Mike was brushing him off. Jimmy expressed his deep concern for his wife and said he couldn't go on like this, because when Lalo threatened Jimmy to tell the truth, Mike had heard their entire conversation and knew that it was Kim who risked her life to save Jimmy. Seeing the strong bond between Jimmy and Kim, Mike finally agreed to reveal some information.
This man has other things on his mind. He's not thinking about you. Lalo Salamanca is going to die. Tonight. This time tomorrow it'll be done.
After all this, Jimmy finally realized he was just a small player in the game. Hearing that Lalo would be taken out tonight, the weight on Jimmy's heart was finally lifted. At the same time, Kim ran into Howard at the courthouse. He told her about Jimmy's pranks on him. Howard thought that Kim would be like a normal person, think that Jimmy did not do right. "I did not expect Kim to hold back," almost did not laugh out loud. Seeing Kim react this way truly shocked Howard. He said that no mentally stable person would do what Jimmy did and that he thought Jimmy had psychological issues and needed help. Howard also knew that Kim had given up Mesa Verde, a big client, and he believed that Jimmy had influenced her decision. However, Kim's response made Howard feel like he was meddling in her affairs. Howard never expected that his goodwill would be seen as discrimination. When Kim returned to the hotel and heard from Jimmy that they were safe, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. Later, during dinner, Kim told Jimmy about running into Howard. Jimmy initially thought Kim was questioning him for hiding something from her, so he explained that it was a pre-marriage secret. But Kim didn't mean that. She also thought Howard was taking himself too seriously and needed someone to teach him a lesson. So, Kim asked Jimmy what he planned to do next. They hit it off and came up with a series of pranks. What's more, they even discussed the matter in bed. It looks like Howard is in for a rough time. As they talked, the conversation shifted to the Sandpiper Crossing case. Since the case was being handled jointly by HHM and DM law firms, if they could ruin Howard's reputation, their partner Clifford would likely settle the case early. Once the case was settled, Jimmy, as the initiator of the case, would receive a commission. After a series of complex calculations, the commission would be as much as $2 million. Kim asked Jimmy what he would do with the money, and since he hadn't thought about it, he asked Kim what she would do with it. Kim said she would bring over some former colleagues and open a law firm near the courthouse, dedicated to providing legal aid to those who couldn't afford a lawyer. This was the main reason she resigned. But dreams need to be built on a certain economic foundation. To achieve this goal quickly, they needed to get the settlement money as soon as possible. Jimmy knew that doing this would cost Howard dearly, so he advised Kim not to keep picking on Howard. This wasn't a joke. However, Kim was unfazed. She thought they could handle it delicately, only giving Howard a small setback in his career. The benefit would be helping many people in need. She felt there was nothing wrong with that. Hearing this, Jimmy felt this wasn't like Kim and wanted her to calm down and reconsider. In the finale of the 4th season, Jimmy made a similar gesture that marked his transformation into Saul, leaving a confused Kim behind. In the finale of the 5th season, Kim made a similar gesture, marking her choice of a dark path. Similarly, this left Jimmy completely bewildered. In the final season, the 6th season of the series, Kim and Jimmy team up to execute their craziest plan ever.